So you're going to need to make sure you've got a couple of things before you get started. You need to have installed the two AA batteries into your transmitter, and you're going to want a charged battery. Then you can have a think about the parts that you need. So you've got your Res-V3 board, servo for the steering, on-off switch, you've got your battery connector, you've got your headlights, connector for the motor that will slide onto the motor pins, and your speaker, all of which should have come in your Res-V3 pack, and have your Res-V3 wiring diagram to hand as well, because you want to check that as you're wiring things up. So first thing I'm going to do is connect the motor wires onto the motor. So I'm going to need my chassis with my gearbox in it, and I'm just going to take out the front two gearbox mount screws and loosen off the two rear gearbox mount screws, so I can tip the gearbox up slightly and get better access to those terminals on the motor. I've got a soldering iron over to my right hand side there. That's been heating up, so that is ready to go. And when you take those screws for the gearbox case out, you can use the extension that's available in the drive shaft just to lift it up slightly. We can get to those contacts a lot more easily. And there we go, there is our motor wires, and I'm going to tin the ends of those, and I'm going to tin the ends of the motor contacts. Solder on those motor contacts. There we go. We should now just be able to get those soldered on. I'm following the markings on the motor, but actually it's pretty academic because I can switch the connector around on the board because it just slides onto those pins. Got too much solder on there. So there's our motor connections on. And pop that gearbox back into place and do up those screws so I don't forget to have a look at that later. And then I'm just going to do a quick assembly of the Res-V3 circuit just to make sure everything's working. And one really important thing I need to do before installing the servo is I want to center the servo. So I need to power up the electrics to get that servo to center. Then I can fit the servo arm, and then we can start putting it all in the chassis. Gearbox is back in. And here we are with our Res-V3. So I'm going to connect the power connection first. This is the critical one. This is the one that will decide whether I kill the receiver or not. So let's have a look at the wiring diagram. We have got the power connector down at the bottom right, and that connects with the positive terminal to the inside of the board, and we can see that positive terminal on there. On my red wire goes to the inside on. Then we've got our on-off switch Gonna follow that pattern with my on-off switch. And you'll notice that actually the plugs are the other way round on there. Probably a hangover from the ready to run boards. And we need our motor connection in there. Well, I'm going to follow the pattern of red inboard, but we'll see what happens. If our car goes backwards, it's no bother to swap it round. Steering servo is going to go on the middle of the 3 outputs with the orange signal cable towards the right hand end of the board. Speaker with the positive connection to the outside of the board goes on those 2 little connections there. On that goes, and our headlights go on the last of that group of 4, again with the positive to the outside of the board. That's our board wired up. Gonna check our power connection. We should be positive to the inside of the board, positive to the inside of the board. And I'm ready to go. So I'm going to turn on my transmitter, plug in the battery, and switch on the power. Hoping to hear a little tweak from the servo. There we go. There's the servo entered. There's the headlights flashing to show that the system needs to bind. Turn on the transmitter, press the bind button, and everything's connected. Servo's working fine. Pull the trigger and we'll get the engine start. And then hopefully we've got forwards and reverse. Lovely. And we've got everything wired the correct way round as well. Reverse is sending the car backwards, forward is sending it forwards. So now we can get on with installing the various parts of the electronics. Just gonna disconnect the battery for a mo. And now the servo is centered. In fact, I'm just going to reconnect that and make sure the steering trim is centered on the transmitter. So it looks like the steering trim is centered when the trim control is level, and we are good to go for carrying on. Servo, horn, and we're going to sit that straight downwards to begin with, and we can adjust that if necessary. Pop that on. Can be quite a squeeze to get that on the splines of the servo, but it's good that it's nice and tight. And then our little M3 screw there to fit that on. There we go. Servo's ready to go in. Pop that in. And we want to use a couple of flange screws in those 2 holes there to hold the servo down. And I'm going to pop a couple of washers on those as well, just so that they cover a little bit more of that servo. Servo cable run all the way round the outside, and that will come up in front of the servo to plug into the board. The board seems to fit nicely screwed to that peg on the top there. So we'll grab another small flange screw and fix the board down there. Do some of this cable down the front there and pop the steering back into position. Our on-off switch is going to fit in the front here. Again, we've got some cable to lose. Let's pop that through that way. Fix in there. Speaker I'm going to unplug for now because that's going to pass through the access hole in the inner tray. Likewise, the battery connector is going to need to pass up into that inner tray. Tuck the external ESC connection down the back there because we're not going to be using that, and I'll probably end up removing that from the board at some point. Got our headlights, they need to come forwards, and we've got our motor connections that are going to go down the back. And I'm going to pass them under the headlight connections. And now we're ready to try and jiggle on the inner tray. Get our speaker connection through. And our battery connection through. Checking my battery positive and negative. Positive to the right hand marked side on the board. speaker. The positive to the outside of the board. Be a bit of a twiddle, getting all that cabling in to a position where it's not bending the cable over too much on the board. Make sure wires aren't sticking over the posts. There we go, so our headlight connections are ready to connect in with the body shell. We've got a nice spot for the speaker down there. And our battery comes up over the top. Give everything a quick test. Still got power. Give it a bind. And I noticed a little bit of interference there. Looks like we're going to need to add the capacitors to the motor. And there are our electrics in. So after noticing I was getting a little bit of interference through the speaker from the motor, I've decided to go back and fit the interference suppression capacitor across the motor terminals. I'm going to try it with one first of all. If we're still getting interference after that, we'll do another capacitor from the positive terminal to the motor can and from the negative terminal to the motor can. But we'll see how we go with one first of all. You should have got your little bag of capacitors in the Res-V3 radio set. I have lifted up my motor in the same way that we did when we soldered on the cabling. So we'll see how we get on. A little blob of solder on the tip of the soldering iron. And of course I have lost my connection, so I'm going to pop that through there. cable's back on, not ever so tidily, it has to be said. Press these in. Resolder that motor connection. And we should be good to go. Give everything a check again. Lovely, that's looking good. So, pop that off, disconnect the battery for a mo, and then we'll get this inner tray back on. And we're going to call our electrics complete. So we're all back together. Last thing to do is connect the servo to the steering. So we need to add our link from the servo horn to the steering arm. And we need the cranked rod, a pair of rod ends, 2 brass balls. We'll need one of our little M2.5 screws. And we'll need a little self-tapper to go into the servo. And I'm going to assemble this dry for now, and then use there we go. We've got our arm up to the servo, and we just need to find a suitable screw for that. And I usually use one of the longer self-tapping screws. Pop that in. to the second hole up on the servo to reduce the throw slightly. And there we go. We should have steering as well. Let's pop the wheels on while we're at it. Always the most exciting part, getting the wheels on. We have got action. We've got a truck that steers. Going to need to have a little bit of adjustment on that steering. And we've got a truck that drives. Lovely. So thanks for watching part 3 of the C44KM builds. We've got the electrics in. Next thing we need to do is build the body shell, get it all put together, and we can take it outside for a run. Thanks again for watching, guys. Please do like and subscribe if you've enjoyed the content, found it useful, it's helped you with your build. We love to see your comments as well. Thank you very much.